the Supreme Court today struck down restrictions on political spending.
Do we still have a government of the people, by the people, for the people, or do we have a government that's for big corporations and super wealthy people?
The premise is freedom of speech. The more speech, the better.
We need justices on the Supreme Court who will protect every citizen's right to vote, not every corporation's right to buy elections.
Consider the fact that there's more money in the US political system now than at any time since the 1970s. How does this make you feel? Concerned, indifferent, surprised, assured? The variety of responses to this reality is what makes the issue of money in politics a contentious one. The same can be said about the Supreme Court case known as Citizens United v. Federal Election Commission, a case which brought up questions such as, do corporations have the same protections as that of a person, and does money really impact the outcome of elections? But perhaps the biggest question brought about by the Citizens United case was the one many fear the answer to. Who is the government really working for? Most Americans are unfamiliar with the campaign finance laws that govern their democracy. In fact, according to the New York Times, polls have shown that relatively few people understand or are even aware of campaign finance rules. This may not seem surprising, but consider the fact that campaign finance laws have been around since the days of our first president. They really began to take form in 1758, when George Washington, who was running for the House of Burgesses, bought $195 worth of cider for potential voters. Washington won the election, but his unethical campaign tactics prompted the legislature to pass a law banning candidates from giving voters any present, gift, reward, or entertainment in order to be elected. However, before the Citizens United ruling, the most recent act regarding campaign regulations came from the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act, which banned political ads that referenced a candidate within 60 days of a general election or 30 days of a primary election. It was with these restrictions that the conservative nonprofit Citizens United, which advocated for concepts like limited government and security, took issue.
They wanted to make a video-on-demand movie that was very critical of then presidential candidate Hillary Rodham Clinton.
She makes herself sound like she has diplomatic experience, like she has managerial experience, as if she has policy development experience. She doesn't have any of those things.
However, because of its subject matter and its planned release date, which was scheduled for 30 days before the 2008 primary elections, the film was considered to be in violation with the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act. Citizens United took the Federal Election Commission all the way to the Supreme Court, claiming that the regulations outlined in the Bipartisan Campaign Reform Act violated their right to freedom of speech. In 2010, with a 5-4 vote in its favor, Citizens United won, granting political action groups the ability to air political ads whenever they wished and throw as much money behind them as they pleased. Justice Kennedy explained that the First Amendment provides that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech. Laws enacted to control or suppress speech may operate at different points in the speech process and are thus a ban on speech. Because the Supreme Court found the protections outlined in the Constitution to extend to organizations, the concept of corporate personhood, or the idea that companies have the same rights as people, was created. The court justified its decision by saying that corporations are made up of an association of citizens and are therefore protected by the Constitution. In 1895, notorious campaign manager Mark Hanna, who used his wealth and connections to get President McKinley elected, infamously stated, "There are two things that are important in politics. One is money, and I can't remember what the other one is." This quote makes it clear that money has always been closely tied with politics, but when it comes to determining the role Citizens United has played in this relationship, the data isn't so clear, given that political spending was on the rise even before Citizens United. However, it's difficult to ignore the fact that the 2012 presidential election, the first following Citizens United, saw more than twice the political spending as any previous election, and that independent political spending of the kind Citizens United allows accounted for all of that increase. Much of this new money can be attributed to super PACs, or political action committees, which, under the Citizens United ruling, are allowed to spend unlimited amounts towards communications like advertisements, email blasts, and survey research to advocate for the election or defeat of candidates. Many argue their newfound power under Citizens United has led to politicians spending less time working and more time fundraising, evident in this graph showing the growing amount of first-term fundraisers. This trend in campaign strategy explains the fact that the United States spends more on campaigns than most other countries, even taking into account its large population. For example, in India's last general election, it spent $5 billion. That is $1 billion less than the US spent during its general election in 2012. and campaign costs are still growing astronomically, especially when compared to the cost of healthcare, GDP, and income.
What the Supreme Court did in Citizens United is say to these same billionaires, you own and control the economy, you own Wall Street, you own the coal companies, you own the oil companies. Now, for a very small percentage of your wealth, we're going to give you the opportunity to own the United States government.
All this may sound scary to someone who wants the little guy to have a voice at the polls, but in reality, there's no linear relationship between amount of money and degree of success in politics. In other words, there is currently no evidence that those who receive more money and spend more money are more likely to win an election because of any financial backing. A main reason for this trend is because money is only helpful in an election if it goes toward effective campaign strategies, and it's the politicians that are most efficient with their money, no matter how much they have, that often end up winning. And yet, despite this, money continues to be a defining aspect of American elections. One theory as to why they are so expensive is because America is a big, rich country, and reaching a population of 314 million costs a lot, particularly in competitive media markets such as New York and Florida. The Citizens United ruling is no doubt adding to these costs, as it has allowed super PACs to air more ads and spend more money on politicians, increasing competition for super PAC support and airtime between candidates. Politicians want as much money as possible, so they have more of a chance of funding effective campaign strategies. Some claim this reality in American politics makes it so financially poor but qualified candidates do not have a chance at office. This feeling that the system is rigged or unjust is nothing new. According to a survey done by the Pew Research Center, 3 out of 4 Americans said they believed politicians put their own interests ahead of the nation's, and only 1 in 5 Americans said they trusted their government always or most of the time. There is general animosity between Americans and their elected officials, animosity that has only been exacerbated by the Citizens United ruling. According to a study done by the University of Maryland and nonpartisan group Voice of the People, both liberals and conservatives want to overturn Citizens United and are unhappy that their government is inactive in changing the ruling. This cartoon perfectly exemplifies how many feel about the ruling, that it has allowed corporations to have a larger voice in politics and has silenced the everyday American. In fact, so many Americans feel powerless at the hands of corporations that it's deterring them from voting. A survey done by the Brennan Center for Justice at NYU School of Law found that 1 in 4 respondents, and even larger numbers of low-income people, African Americans, and Latinos, reported that they are less likely to vote because they feel super PACs have so much more sway than the average American when it comes to the outcomes of elections. These sentiments of distrust and helplessness have led to states taking matters into their own hands. At least 10 states have passed measures in opposition to Citizens United, though no measure has been passed on the federal level. Of course, it seems as though faith in American democracy would increase if only campaign regulations were tougher, but nonetheless, there is no evidence that stricter campaign finance rules reduce corruption or raise positive assessments of the government. So how do we restore our trust in our government and democratic system? Some argue that, instead of increased campaign regulations, a shortened U.S. election season wouldn't exhaust voters and would result in less money plaguing American campaigns. Though it would be difficult to encourage change in an accelerating political culture that revolves around elections, doing so could offer those both for and against Citizens United a way to keep the First Amendment intact while keeping a check on politicians. When it comes to the constitutionality of the Citizens United ruling, the debate could not be more fierce. Opponents of the ruling argue that it was an example of judicial activism, or when justices ignore what the Constitution says in favor of what they want it to say. These dissenters argue that the founders did not intend companies to have power in elections, as in post-Revolutionary War America, the power of large shareholders was limited by scaled voting, so that large and small investors had equal voting rights. However, other Americans found the ruling to be a major win for natural rights.
You target corporations and labor unions with restrictions on speech. You are targeting people of average means.
James Bopp, the attorney that successfully represented Citizens United, has said that campaign regulations such as those demolished by the Citizens United decision prevent citizens from criticizing politicians, violating the ability to participate in politics in our democratic process as intended by the founders. Ultimately, because it is so young, the full effects of Citizens United have yet to be seen, but there is no denying the debate the case has reignited and the new money it has poured into the American political system. However, based on the current climate regarding the case, it seems as though it's just a matter of time before people begin to demand more of their politicians and less of their money.